Argument that climate change is settled science, well, it's no more. Scientists and researchers are now stepping forward and declaring that the narrative is fake. Many are arguing that while, yes, the climate changes, they're saying there's no climate emergency. So, Alex, we've been told for a long time the climate change emergency is settled science. It looks like it's no longer settled. What happened?
Well, there's a series of 3 new peer-reviewed papers published in major prestigious scientific journals just over the last month or so. And taken together, they completely undermine the alleged scientific consensus on man-made global warming. One of them found that about 40% of the observed warming can be explained away using the urban heat island effect. So, to try to summarize that, basically a lot of these thermometers were put out there in an open field, in a rural area, a city was built up around it, and so it gets warmer, obviously, not because there's global warming, but because there's a city around the thermometer. The rest of the warming, they found, can be easily explained using changes in solar activity that NASA has been tracking meticulously for many decades. And so right now, these are in the peer-reviewed literature, and instead of responding to this, you've got the climate establishment going on Twitter and saying these guys are basically poo-poo heads and clowns and deniers. So, you know, at this point, you wonder, do they have a scientific response? Because if they did, they would probably write a peer-reviewed paper to refute the ones that just undermined their claims.
Well, how did they get them in? You know, it's hard to get a peer-reviewed paper when it comes to these topics. What was the kind of hole in the wall that brought this about, so to speak?
You're right. It is very hard to get any peer-reviewed studies in the journals because there's almost like an iron wall blocking this. And so what happened is these papers were just really solid. You know, these 3 journals that published them, they're not known for being, you know, climate denier publications, but the science was very sound. They did one special issue in the journal Climate, for example. They had some guest editors, including Dr. Ned Nikolov, who I wrote about back in 2017. They looked at this. They said, wow, you know, this is correct as best as we can tell. So the peers looked at it, they accepted it, and you know, this is a really prestigious team, Josh. We're talking about almost 40 scientists from around the world. The lead author, Dr. Willie Soon, one of the world's top astrophysicists, if not the top astrophysicist, used to be at the Harvard Smithsonian. You've got Ronan Connolly. These are very, very well established, very prestigious, highly credentialed experts, and you know, it's good to finally see some alternative viewpoints published in the peer-reviewed literature. I think the dam is finally cracking, Josh.
Scientific consensus, we're told, climate change is your fault, it's your breath, it's the cows, it's the farms. But there's a lot of scientists that are not in this conversation because they're not part of the consensus. But there's a lot of science and there's a lot of research in other areas that have to do with what is causing and driving climate change on this planet. One of them happens to be that thermonuclear fission ball of magnetic goodness in the sky, the sun, that's right above our heads. And there it is right there. And it's shooting out a solar flare. And you can see how massive this is. These solar flares are gigantic. The sun goes through solar cycles. Right now we're in solar cycle 25. We're at the peak of solar cycle 25. What happens at the peak? Well, we have a lot more solar activity. And so this is the headlines. These are mainstream headlines you can see here on December 15th. The biggest solar flare since 2017 just launched off the sun. And then on the 1st of January 2024, to greet us into the new year, strongest solar flare since 2017 detected. Here's what to know. And those solar flares do have an impact on the climate here. In fact, in 1997, before, you know, the scientific consensus, we were told, this is the New York Times reporting on this, just an everyday report. Another possible climate culprit, the sun. Dr. Tinsley is the University of Texas. He's been studying this for over 60 years. He's an atmospheric physicist, and he wrote a paper. He's written many papers. One of them is here, Solar Influence on Climate During the Past Millennia. So he talks about something called solar forcing, and these are the variations in solar activity and how they play a significant role in forcing climate change. So basically there's a whole field of study claiming that our climate system on Earth is very sensitive to, who would have thought, the sun. We have several cycles of ice ages that we've been involved in, and here's a graph right here. You can see several of them over millions of years. And to put a really fine point on this, we have Australian geologist Ian Plimer. He's from Australia, and he was at a CPAC event, and this is what he had to say about it. Take a listen.
There's one group of people that use models, another group of people I mean, this is really sinful. We use evidence, and the two are not in accord. And if they're not in accord, you've got to throw out the models, which we've seen time and time again are incorrect. So we can look back in the past, and we can see that we've had 6 great ice ages. During that ice age, we'll have the ice expand, that's a glaciation, or it will contract, that's an interglacial. We are currently in an interglacial of an ice age that started on a Thursday 34 million years ago. And the ice has come and gone. So if someone says, oh, this is the hottest day on record, you have to ask, since when? So if we go to the peak of our interglacial, which was about 4,000 years ago, it was about 5 degrees warmer. So it's cooler than the hottest temperature on record. If we go to the time of Jesus, when it was warm, it's about 4 degrees cooler. I know this is going to surprise you, but we've just come out of a little ice age. What do you think temperature's going to do? Fall or rise? It's been rising since the Maunder minimum more than 300 years ago.
How do we explain this? Is there really a crisis going on? Or are we injecting ourselves into a known pattern? Part of me thinks that these God-complex scientists know we're heating on a natural cycle and are going to try and see if man can actually stop that natural cycle. That's what I'm starting to wonder, if that's what's really going on as they try to tell us we're creating it. I don't know. The whole thing is so bogus now. And again, not to say I want to be able to eat a fish that I catch my son in a river or in the ocean. I'm into cleaning this up. We all need to work together to do that. But we shouldn't be bowing down to some piece of insanity that actually doesn't stand up in science.
Once again, I spent a lot of reading about climate change, having realised that all my faith, my system, I mean, I've been probably through the system. I was part of the establishment until I realised what they were doing I didn't want to be part of. But it's the same with the so-called climate people. And the climate people who've taken over, they are being used. There's no climate crisis in my interpretation of this, and there is no correlation. Most importantly, there's no correlation at all between CO2 and heat, in which the whole of this net zero nonsense is broken. And here I would just like to hold up. I don't know if you can see that. See that?
We can. Yep, we can see that.
Well, Plimer has. He basically writes that book in the same frustration that I wrote and edited The Death of Science, has the same frustration. If you look at the facts, none of it adds up. But he and everybody else is told to shut up. I can't believe the number of people who are very big, like head of climate change in Cambridge and various other big people. They've all come to the same conclusion. It's all a gigantic hoax. And it's like being in a dystopian nightmare. Who's science behind the CO2?
Βρεθήκαν επιστήμονες με κακαλά και κάνανε αυτό που βλέπετε εδώ. Δεν υπάρχει κλιματική, όχι ανάγκη, emergency. Ναι, καλά, ανάγκη τώρα μπορούμε να δω, αλλά emergency είναι, ξέρεις αυτό ρε παιδί μου, το κατεπήγον. Ότι πρέπει τώρα κάτι να κάνουμε με τον πλανήτη, να αλλάξουμε, ξέρω εγώ, να σταματήσουμε να γίνουμε πετρέλαιο και σε αυτές τις μαλακίες. Θα μου πεις εντάξει, οκ, βγάλανε μία έρευνα κάποιοι επιστήμονες, 2.000 εμπροκειμένο, με ειδικότητες στο κλίμα, ας πούμε, κτλ. Δεν θα κάτσουμε τώρα να το διαβάσουμε γιατί είναι και μεγάλο, απλά να δούμε μερικά ονόματα. Και να δούμε και ειδικότητες, έτσι. Καθηγητής, έχει πάρει και Νόμπελ, έτσι, δεν είναι κανένα στοιχείο, Νορβηγία και Αμερική. Εδώ πάλι καθηγητής, όλοι οι καθηγητές είναι έτσι, doctor, professor, σου λέει και τα πανεπιστήμια κτλ. Και αυτά είναι τα πιο μεγάλα ονόματα, την έχουν υπογράψει αυτή την έρευνα, ας πούμε, περί διοξιδίου και το αν είναι ανθρωπογενής και όλες αυτές, όλα αυτά που μας λένε στα κανάλια, παιδιά. Την έχουν υπογράψει οι άνθρωποι, έχουν απίστευτες περγαμενές και αξίζει να τη διαβάσει όποιος έχει όρεξη να τη διαβάσει ολόκληρη. Και σου αποδομούν ένα-ένα τα επιχειρήματα περί κλιματικής αλλαγής, ότι ο πλανήτης έχει πρόβλημα, Λένε και για τον ήλιο, ρε παιδί μου, ότι αλλάζει τη θερμοκρασία και δεν πρέπει να υπερβάλλουμε να κάνουμε έτσι. Και είναι υπογεγραμμένο, άμα σου πει κάποιος, μα καλά, εσύ ξέρεις καλύτερα από επιστήμονες. Ωραία, πάρε εδώ επιστήμονες. Πάρε επιστήμονες εδώ. Κάτσε να το βάλω και στο chat. Πάρε εδώ 2.000 επιστήμονες, οι οποίοι θα μου πεις για ποιο λόγο, ρε παιδί μου, πάνε κόντρα στο σύστημα τώρα. Γιατί από ό,τι φαίνεται ήταν τόσο καλοί στη δουλειά τους που δεν χρειάζονται επιδότηση. Σαν όλα τα άλλα τα σχολικάκια που το παίζουν επιστήμονες, που για να πάρουν μια επιδοτησούλα για να πληρωθούν άλλον ένα χρόνο στο πανεπιστήμιο, κατεβάζουν τα παντελόνια και κάθονται και λένε ψέματα στον κόσμο. Για τους μοιάζει μόνο τσέπη. Αυτοί έχουν και ευτυχία. Λοιπόν, να τελειώσει αυτό το παραμύθι με την κλιματική αλλαγή και όλες αυτές τις μαλακίες. Το κλίμα αλλάζει από τον ήλιο, από τον πλανήτη, όχι από εμάς. Όχι από εμάς.
As an engineer educated in atmospheric gases, and as a business manager, I was responsible for hundreds of people's lives based on my knowledge of atmospheric gases. I listen to scientists, I cross-examine scientists, and I debate the science. I have never found anyone with logical scientific points based on empirical scientific evidence that shows we have anything to worry about at all. And the basics of this: when you burn a hydrocarbon fuel, you burn molecules containing carbon and hydrogen. With oxygen, they form CO2, carbon dioxide, and H2O, water vapour. That's it. Carbon dioxide is essential for all life. But let's go beyond the science and have a look at natural experiment. We've had 2 natural experiments, global experiments, in the last 14 years. The first was in 2009, when the use of hydrocarbon fuels in the recession that followed the global financial crisis reduced. There was less carbon dioxide produced from human use of hydrocarbons. And what happened to the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere? It kept increasing over restrictions placed by governments. We saw the same reduction in hydrocarbon fuel used by humans, the same cut in carbon dioxide output from humans, and yet carbon dioxide in the atmosphere continued increasing. And those who understand the science understand that it is fundamental. Humans cannot and do not affect the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. It's controlled by nature entirely.
The opportunity of wishing the East European cities well in the coming of the very early skiing season and snow and ice that's come there, well, of course, is indicative of the fact that, as independent science has now confirmed, that the globe is actually cooling and has been cooling since 2002, broadly flat since 1998. We're all talking about something here which isn't happening. I've heard time and time again members here talk of CO2 as a pollutant. A pollutant is a life-giving natural gas. It gives me the impression that some of our members haven't had the benefit of a formal education. Isn't this really just about the state being able to get its hand in ordinary people's trouser pocket to steal yet more tax from them? Isn't this all about political control? Isn't all this about politics and big business? The whole thing's a sham. This bogus hypothesis, this ridiculous nonsense that man-made CO2 is causing global warming. Enough, please, before we damage irrevocably the global economy.
Last Tanya Plibersek was the Deputy Leader of the Labor Party and the potential Deputy Prime Minister, was carbon dioxide the big issue in relation to climate change? And she said yes. I then said, well, that being the case, what percentage of the atmosphere is made up of carbon dioxide? And she said, I don't know. And I said, hang on, you don't know what percentage of the atmosphere is carbon dioxide, and yet you're prepared to stand the economy on its head to address a problem, the detail of which you don't know. So when I then explained that the percentage of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, Alice, is how much? Alice, how much of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere?
To answer the question, Scott Morrison has said he believes in climate change and that he wants to do something about it.
Alice, how much carbon dioxide is the problem? How much carbon dioxide is there in the atmosphere?
I'm not a scientist. I don't know. I'm a
well, hang on. If you're going to argue the case, you ought to know it's 0.04%. And of that 0.04%, human beings around the world create 3%. And of that 3%, Australia creates 1.3%. So for the 1.3% of 3% of 0.04%, we then decide to have a national economic suicide.
Alan, I'm happy for you to have made that point.
climate right now is no warmer than it's been many times throughout history. Our baseline is now the lowest that carbon dioxide has been in 600 million years. As far as temperature change, the IPCC's first report of 1992 showed that the medieval warm period was warmer than the present. Well, this didn't fit the narrative, so by the time the 1996 report came out, it was a completely contrived graph called the hockey stick. So what they did was they got rid of the medieval warm period and the Little Ice Age, and so instead of the graph doing this, they flattened it out, and then they added instrumental record on the end that looks like it's going way up. The point is that the people that are calling them out on it are not getting the media coverage. You know, because look, at this point there's billions of dollars going into the whole climate change narrative.